"Your wife is cheating," my father-in-law lied to my husband, showing fake evidence. "Divorce her before she takes everything." After my husband left me, I discovered the truth and planned my revenge. 6 months later, at his retirement party, I revealed who had really been stealing from the family business. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I was staring at the red numbers on my bedside clock, wondering if I'd ever sleep normally again. It had been 3 weeks since Camden packed his bags and walked out of our 5-year marriage, leaving nothing but divorce papers and a note that said, "I can't live with a liar anymore." Hey everyone, it's Evangeline here, and I need to share something with you that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you about family betrayal and standing up for yourself might hit close to home no matter where you are. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe, because we all need to support each other when dealing with toxic family dynamics. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I'd been married to Camden Holbrook for 5 beautiful years. We met in college. He was studying business administration while I was getting my degree in forensic accounting. Yeah, that detail becomes important later. Camden came from what you'd call old money. His father, Garrison Holbrook, owned Holbrook and Associates, a construction company that had been in the family for 3 generations. They weren't just wealthy, they were Connecticut elite, the kind of family that had their name on hospital wings and country club plaques. From day one, Garrison made it clear I wasn't good enough for his precious son. I came from a middle-class family in Ohio. My dad was a mechanic, my mom worked at the local library. To Garrison, I was trailer trash who'd somehow managed to trick his Harvard-educated son into marriage. Never mind that I graduated summa cum laude or that I'd built my own successful accounting firm by age 28. In his eyes, I was a gold digger, plain and simple. The family dynamics were toxic from the start. Camden's mother, Cordelia, had died when he was 12, leaving Garrison to raise him alone. Instead of bringing them closer, it created this unhealthy codependency where Camden could never disappoint his father. Garrison used guilt and manipulation like weapons, constantly reminding Camden of all the sacrifices he'd made as a single parent, how the family business needed to stay in the family, how outsiders couldn't be trusted. Camden's sister, Mallory, was Daddy's little princess who could do no wrong. She was 2 years older than Camden and had been groomed from birth to marry well and produce heirs. She'd married Thaddeus Carmichael III, another old money family, and they lived in a mansion 3 blocks from Garrison. Mallory had perfected the art of looking down on people while smiling sweetly, and she particularly enjoyed making little digs about my background during family gatherings. Then there was Camden's younger brother, Sterling, who was the family screw-up. He'd been in and out of rehab, had gambling debts, and couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months. But somehow, I was still considered the bigger threat to the family's reputation. Sterling could blow through $50,000 in Vegas, but God forbid I wore the wrong dress to a charity gala. For 5 years, I played the perfect daughter-in-law. I attended their stuffy dinner parties, donated to their charities, and bit my tongue when Garrison would make passive-aggressive comments about my humble origins. I did it because I loved Camden, and I naively believed that eventually, they'd see who I really was and accept me. The beginning of the end started 6 months before that phone call. Garrison had been acting stranger than usual during family dinners. He'd watch me with these calculating eyes like he was studying me for weaknesses. He'd ask pointed questions about my work, my clients, my schedule. At the time, I thought he was finally taking an interest in my career. How wrong I was. Then came the lies. It started small, Garrison telling Camden that I'd been rude to the housekeeper, that I'd made inappropriate comments about family finances, that other wives in their social circle had mentioned my odd behavior at events. Camden would bring these up with me, confused and hurt, and I'd defend myself, but the seed of doubt was already planted. The manipulation escalated when Garrison began creating fake scenarios. He'd call Camden at work, claiming I'd missed important family events or forgotten obligations. He'd show Camden receipts for expensive purchases, claiming I'd been hiding my spending. When I'd prove these things weren't true, Garrison would apologize and say there must have been a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Camden was starting to question everything about our relationship. The final blow came 3 months before our divorce. Garrison presented Camden with what he claimed was irrefutable proof of my infidelity. He had photographs, grainy, but clearly showing me entering a hotel with a man who wasn't my husband. He had credit card statements showing charges at expensive restaurants on days when I'd told Camden I was working late. He even had a private investigator's report detailing my alleged affair. I'll never forget the look on Camden's face when he confronted me. It wasn't just hurt, it was disgust, like he was seeing me for the first time and realizing he'd been married to a stranger. "How long has this been going on, Evangeline?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been making a fool of me?" I tried to explain that it wasn't true, that someone was setting me up, but the evidence looked damning. The man in the photos was Marcus Chen, a client of mine who owned several tech startups. We had met at hotels, for business meetings in their conference rooms. The restaurant charges were legitimate business dinners where we discussed his company's financial restructuring. But in the context Garrison had presented them, they looked like proof of a torrid affair. "I've defended you for 5 years, Camden said, his voice breaking. "Every time my family questioned your motives, I stood up for you. I told them they were wrong, that you loved me for who I was, not what I had. And this whole time, you've been playing me for a fool." That's when I realized the true genius of Garrison's plan. He hadn't just wanted to destroy my marriage. He'd wanted to destroy my relationship with the only person in that family who'd ever believed in me. By making Camden feel like he'd been naive and foolish to trust me, Garrison had ensured that his son would never forgive me, never question the evidence, never give me a chance to prove my innocence. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Garrison had hired the best lawyers in the state, and they painted me as a calculating adulteress who'd married for money and was now trying to take half of everything in the divorce. I tried to fight it, tried to prove my innocence, but the evidence against me was too compelling, too perfectly constructed. Camden refused to speak to me directly. All communication went through lawyers. I lost our beautiful home in Westport, got a minimal settlement that barely covered my legal fees, and found myself starting over at 33 with nothing but my accounting business and a reputation in tatters. The first few months after the divorce were the darkest of my life. I'd lost not just my husband, but the future we'd planned together. We'd been trying to have children, had picked out names, had started looking at bigger houses with good school districts. All of that was gone, destroyed by one man's hatred and prejudice. I threw myself into work, taking on more clients, working 16-hour days just to keep my mind off the pain. But even that became difficult when word of the divorce spread through Connecticut's tight-knit business community. Some clients questioned whether they could trust someone who'd allegedly cheated on her husband. Others dropped me entirely, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. It was during one of those sleepless nights, about 2 months after the divorce was finalized, that I decided to do what I should have done from the beginning: investigate. As a forensic accountant, I knew how to dig deep into financial records, how to spot inconsistencies and follow money trails. If Garrison had gone to such elaborate lengths to frame me, there had to be a reason beyond simple dislike. I started with the private investigator he'd hired, a man named Rick Paulson who had a small office in Hartford. It took some digging, but I discovered that Paulson had been paid not just for investigating me, but for several other jobs over the past 2 years. The payments all came from a shell company called Meridian Consulting, which traced back to a business account under Garrison's control. This was already suspicious, but it got worse. I found records of payments to a photographer, a graphic designer, and even an actor who looked remarkably similar to Marcus Chen. Garrison hadn't just hired someone to investigate me, he'd hired an entire team to fabricate evidence of my affair. But why? The answer came when I started digging into Holbrook and Associates' financial records. As Camden's wife, I'd had access to some of the company's information over the years, and I still had copies of documents I'd reviewed when Camden had asked for my professional opinion on various business matters. What I found made my blood run cold. For the past 3 years, someone had been systematically embezzling money from Holbrook and Associates. It wasn't small amounts. We're talking about nearly $2 million that had been siphoned off through fake vendor payments, inflated material costs, and fraudulent expense reports. The theft was sophisticated, the kind that required intimate knowledge of the company's operations and access to multiple accounts. It wasn't the work of some outside hacker or low-level employee. This was an inside job, and there were only 3 people who had the access and authority to pull it off: Garrison Mallory, who served as the company's CFO, or Sterling, who, despite his personal problems, held a vice president title and had signing authority on several accounts. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. The embezzlement had started around the time Sterling's gambling debts had reached critical levels. He owed money to some very dangerous people, and the family's usual method of bailing him out, giving him a loan that everyone knew would never be repaid, wasn't going to cut it this time. But here's where it got interesting. The money wasn't going to pay off Sterling's debts. It was being funneled into offshore accounts, investment portfolios, and real estate purchases. Someone was using Sterling's desperate situation as cover while they systematically looted the family business. I spent weeks piecing together the financial puzzle, and when I finally saw the complete picture, I felt sick. Garrison Holbrook, the man who destroyed my marriage to protect his family's reputation, was the one stealing from his own company. He'd been planning this for years, slowly moving assets out of the business and into accounts he controlled personally. But Garrison had a problem. As a forensic accountant who'd married into the family, I posed a threat. Sooner or later, Camden might ask me to look at the company's books, especially if he was considering joining the business full-time. I might notice the discrepancies, ask uncomfortable questions, uncover the theft. So Garrison had decided to eliminate the threat. By framing me for adultery and destroying my marriage, he'd accomplished several goals at once. He'd removed me from the family and ensured that Camden would never trust me enough to involve me in family business matters. He'd also damaged my professional reputation, making it less likely that anyone would believe me if I did discover his crimes and try to expose them. It was diabolical, calculated, and almost perfect. Almost. The problem with being a forensic accountant is that you learn to be thorough, to check and double-check everything, to never accept evidence at face value. And Garrison, for all his cunning, had made mistakes. The fake photographs, for instance. The metadata showed they'd been created using photo manipulation software, with digital signatures that proved they'd been altered. The private investigator's report contained inconsistencies in dates and locations that could be easily disproven with cell phone records and credit card statements. Even the actor who'd posed as Marcus Chen had a social media presence that included photos from the day he was supposedly having an affair with me, photos that showed him at a film shoot in Los Angeles. But the real smoking gun was in the financial records. In his haste to frame me, Garrison had overlooked one crucial detail. Several of the fake business expenses he'd used to fund his embezzlement scheme had been charged to credit cards on days when I had rock-solid alibis. He'd created fake vendor invoices for services allegedly provided during times when I could prove I was in meetings with other clients, attending conferences, or even in the hospital getting my appendix removed. It took me 4 months to put together a complete case, but when I was done, I had enough evidence to not only prove my innocence, but to send Garrison to prison for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The question was what to do with this information. I could have gone straight to the police, but that felt too simple, too quick. This man had destroyed my life, turned my husband against me, and ruined my reputation. He deserved something more personal, more devastating than just a criminal conviction. That's when I learned about Garrison's retirement party. After 30 years of running Holbrook and Associates, he was stepping down and handing control of the company to Camden. It was going to be the social event of the season, 200 of Connecticut's most influential people gathering to celebrate Garrison's legacy and welcome the next generation of Holbrook leadership. The party was perfect for my purposes. It would be attended by everyone who mattered in Garrison's world, his business associates, his social circle, his family. It would be recorded by local media covering the transition of one of the state's oldest family businesses. And most importantly, it would be the moment when Garrison felt most triumphant, most secure in his victory over me. I spent 2 weeks preparing for that night. I had copies of all the evidence professionally printed and bound, created a digital presentation that laid out the entire scheme in clear, undeniable detail, and even hired my own private investigator to verify every fact one more time. Getting into the party wasn't difficult. It was being held at the Westbridge Country Club, where I'd attended dozens of events as Camden's wife. I still knew several members, and one of them, a woman named Patricia Ashworth, who never liked Garrison's arrogance, was happy to put me on her guest list when I explained that I had something important to share about Holbrook and Associates' finances. The night of the party, I dressed carefully. I chose a stunning black dress that was elegant but not flashy, professional but not boring. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in that room, someone who couldn't be dismissed or ignored. I did my hair and makeup perfectly, and I wore the diamond earrings Camden had given me for our first anniversary, a reminder of what I'd lost and what I was fighting to reclaim. The Westbridge Country Club was decorated beautifully for the occasion. There were flowers everywhere, a jazz quartet playing softly in the corner, and servers circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A large screen had been set up for a slideshow celebrating Garrison's career, and there was a podium where various speakers would offer toasts and tributes. I arrived fashionably late, wanting to make sure everyone was there before I made my move. I saw Camden almost immediately. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we were married. Mallory was holding court near the bar, regaling a group of women with some story that had them all laughing. Sterling was in a corner, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear and clearly counting the minutes until he could leave. And there was Garrison, the man of the hour, standing near the podium accepting congratulations and well wishes from a steady stream of guests. He looked exactly like what he was, a successful, respected businessman celebrating the culmination of a brilliant career. No one in that room suspected that he was also a thief and a master manipulator who destroyed an innocent woman's life to cover his crimes. I spent the first hour mingling, renewing acquaintances, and positioning myself strategically. I wanted to be near the front when the speeches began, but I also wanted to make sure I had clear sight lines to Garrison, Camden, and the rest of the family. I chatted with old friends, accepted condolences about my divorce with grace and dignity, and gradually worked my way closer to my target. The formal program began at 9 o'clock. The club president spoke first, praising Garrison's contributions to the community. Then came a series of business associates, each offering glowing tributes to his leadership and vision. Mallory gave a touching speech about her father's dedication to family, and Sterling managed to stumble through a few awkward sentences about following in his father's footsteps. Finally, it was Camden's turn. He walked to the podium with confidence, looking every inch the successful executive he'd become. He spoke about learning from his father's example, about the values of integrity and hard work that had built Holbrook and Associates, about his commitment to carrying on the family legacy. "My father taught me that a man's reputation is his most valuable asset," Camden said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "He showed me that success isn't just about making money, it's about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. He taught me to surround myself with people I can trust and to never compromise my principles for personal gain." The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was my ex-husband, praising the very man who destroyed our marriage with lies and manipulation, talking about integrity and trust while standing next to the person who'd embezzled millions from his own company. When Camden finished his speech, there was thunderous applause. Garrison stepped up to the podium for his final remarks, and I knew it was time. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Garrison began, his voice warm and genuine. "This company has been my life's work, and seeing it transition to the next generation fills me with pride and satisfaction." I stood up from my table and began walking toward the front of the room. A few people noticed me moving, but most were focused on Garrison's speech. I've always believed that family comes first, he continued. Everything I've done, every decision I've made, has been to protect and provide for my children. Sometimes that's meant making difficult choices, but I've never regretted putting family above all else. I was halfway to the podium now, close enough that Garrison could see me approaching. His eyes widened slightly when he recognized me, but he continued speaking. As I step down from active leadership of Hallbrook and Associates, I want to assure you all that the company is in excellent hands. Camden has proven himself to be a man of integrity and vision, someone who will uphold the values that have made this company successful for 3 generations. I reached the front of the room and stood directly in front of the podium, looking up at Garrison with a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. The murmur from the crowd was getting louder now as people realized something unusual was happening. I'm confident that under Camden's leadership, Hallbrook and Associates will continue to thrive, Garrison said, his voice starting to waver as he tried to figure out what I was doing there. The company's reputation for honesty and reliability will remain intact, and our clients can trust that their business is in good hands. That's when I stepped forward and spoke, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. That's interesting, Garrison, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell me, does that reputation for honesty and reliability extend to embezzling nearly $2 million from your own company? The room erupted. Gasps, shocked exclamations, the sound of chairs scraping as people turned to get a better view of what was happening. Garrison's face went white, and I saw Camden's expression change from confusion to alarm. Evangeline, Garrison said, trying to regain his composure, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is neither the time nor the place. Oh, I think this is exactly the right time and place, I interrupted, pulling out the folder of evidence I'd been carrying. See, I've spent the last 6 months doing what I do best, following the money, and what I found was fascinating. I turned to address the room, making sure my voice projected to every corner. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Evangeline Hallbrook, well, Evangeline Morrison now, thanks to the divorce Garrison orchestrated to cover up his crimes. I'm a forensic accountant, and I have proof that this man you're here to honor has been systematically stealing from Hallbrook and Associates for the past 3 years. The crowd was in chaos now. People were standing up, trying to get closer, pulling out their phones to record what was happening. I saw several members of the media pushing forward, realizing they were witnessing a major story unfold. That's enough, Garrison shouted, trying to retake control of the situation. Security, I want this woman removed immediately. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projection system they'd been using for the slideshow. Within seconds, financial documents were displaying on the large screen for everyone to see. Here's a wire transfer for $50,000 to a shell company that doesn't actually exist, I announced, pointing to the screen. And here's another one for $75,000, supposedly for construction materials that were never delivered to any job site. Camden had pushed his way to the front of the crowd and was staring at the screen with growing horror. Evangeline, what is this? What are you talking about? I'm talking about your father framing me for adultery to hide the fact that he's been robbing your family blind, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. He hired actors, faked photographs, and created an entire fictional affair because he knew that sooner or later, someone would notice the missing money. I clicked to the next slide, showing the fake photographs alongside the metadata, proving they'd been digitally manipulated. These photos that convinced you I was cheating? They're composites, created by a graphic designer your father hired. The man you thought was my lover is actually an actor named David Chen, who was paid $5,000 to pose for these images. The room was dead silent now, except for the sound of camera shutters and video recording. Camden was staring at the screen like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And the private investigator's report that detailed my supposed affair. Here's the receipt showing your father paid Rick Paulson not just to investigate me, but to fabricate evidence against me. I turned to face Garrison directly, and the look of pure hatred in his eyes was almost frightening. You destroyed my marriage, ruined my reputation, and tried to drive me out of the state because you were afraid I'd discover what you were really doing, I said. But here's what you didn't count on: I'm very good at my job. The next series of slides showed the complex web of financial manipulation Garrison had created. Fake vendor accounts, inflated invoices, unauthorized transfers to personal accounts. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Over the past 3 years, Garrison Hallbrook has stolen nearly $2 million from Hallbrook and Associates, I announced to the stunned crowd. Money that belonged to his employees, his clients, and his own children. Money he used to fund offshore accounts and investment portfolios while blaming his gambling-addicted son for the company's financial problems. Sterling had pushed his way to the front of the crowd and was staring at his father with a mixture of shock and hurt. "Dad, is this true? Have you been stealing from the company while everyone blamed me?" But Garrison wasn't looking at Sterling. His attention was focused entirely on me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. "This is all fabricated," he said, his voice stronger now as he tried to regain control. "This woman is mentally unstable. She's been harassing my family since the divorce, and now she's creating fake documents too." "The FBI doesn't think they're fake," I interrupted, pulling out my phone. "I turned copies of all this evidence over to the Financial Crimes Division 3 days ago. Agent Martinez should be here any minute to place you under arrest." As if on cue, I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. Garrison's face went from white to gray, and I saw him glance toward the exits, probably calculating whether he could make a run for it. "Don't even think about it," I said quietly, stepping closer to the podium. "There are agents at every exit. You're not going anywhere." The sirens were louder now, and through the club's large windows, I could see the flashing lights of FBI vehicles pulling into the parking lot. The crowd was backing away from the front of the room, creating a clear path for the agents who would be arriving momentarily. "Camden," I said, turning to face my ex-husband, "I know you have no reason to believe me after everything that's happened, but I need you to know that I never cheated on you. I never lied to you. I loved you completely, and losing you was the most devastating thing that's ever happened to me." Camden's face was a mask of confusion and pain. He looked from me to his father to the evidence still displaying on the screen, trying to process everything that had just been revealed. "But Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the photographs, the investigators' report. Why would you? How could you?" "Because he needed me gone," I said gently. "He knew that as a forensic accountant, I'd eventually notice the missing money. So he decided to destroy our marriage and ruin my reputation to eliminate the threat I posed." The FBI agents entered the ballroom at that moment, led by Agent Martinez, whom I'd been working with for the past week. They moved efficiently through the crowd, their focus entirely on Garrison, who stood frozen at the podium like a deer caught in headlights. "Garrison Hallbrook," Agent Martinez announced, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." As the agents handcuffed Garrison and read him his rights, the room erupted in chaos again. Reporters were shouting questions, guests were talking loudly among themselves, and I could hear the sound of phones ringing as news of the arrest began to spread. But I only had eyes for Camden, who was standing a few feet away, looking like his entire world had just collapsed. Which, I suppose, it had. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, stepping closer to him. "I know this isn't how you wanted to find out, but I couldn't let him get away with what he did to us." Camden looked at me with tears in his eyes. 5 years, he whispered. "I threw away 5 years of marriage because I believed his lies." "We both believed them," I said. "He's very good at manipulation. That's how he got away with stealing for so long." As Garrison was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at me one last time. There was no remorse in his expression, no admission of guilt or apology for the lives he'd destroyed. There was only rage and the cold calculation of a man already planning his next move. "This isn't over, Evangeline," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. Actually, I replied, my voice carrying clearly through the room, I think it's exactly over. Your son deserves to know the truth, your employees deserve to get their money back, and I deserve to have my reputation restored. The agents escorted Garrison out of the ballroom, and gradually, the crowd began to disperse. Some guests left immediately, clearly uncomfortable with the evening's dramatic turn. Others lingered, talking in small groups about what they'd witnessed, speculating about what it meant for Holbrook and Associates and the Holbrook family. I was packing up my evidence when Camden approached me again. He looked exhausted, like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Evangeline, he said quietly, I don't know how to. I mean, what I did to you, believing those lies, throwing away our marriage. You were manipulated by someone you trusted, I said. Your father spent years setting up this deception. The evidence he presented was very convincing. But I should have trusted you, Camden said, his voice breaking. I should have known you better than that. I should have fought for our marriage instead of just accepting what he told me. I felt tears starting to form in my own eyes. For 6 months, I'd dreamed of this moment, Camden realizing the truth, apologizing for what he'd done. But now that it was happening, it felt more sad than triumphant. We can't change what happened, I said, but at least now you know the truth. Can we? Is there any chance we could try again? Camden asked. I know I have no right to ask, but if there's any possibility of rebuilding what we had. I looked at this man I'd loved so completely, this man whose betrayal had nearly destroyed me, and I felt nothing. Not love, not hate, just a kind of distant sadness for what we'd lost. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago, I said gently. What your father did to me, what you believed about me, it changed me. I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch, had to learn to trust myself again, had to find my own strength. I understand, Camden said, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. I hope you can rebuild the company, I said. Your employees deserve better than what your father gave them, and I think you're capable of providing that. But as for us, too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken. Camden nodded slowly, accepting what I was telling him even though it obviously hurt. What will you do now? I'm going to go home to my new life, I said. I have a business to run, friends who supported me through the worst time of my life, and a future that belongs entirely to me. The truth was, the past 6 months had been transformative in ways I never could have imagined. After the initial devastation of the divorce, I'd thrown myself into rebuilding not just my career, but my entire sense of self. I'd started therapy with Dr. Rebecca Winters, a psychologist who specialized in helping people recover from emotional abuse and manipulation. Through our sessions, I'd come to understand how Garrison's treatment of me over the years had been a form of psychological warfare, designed to make me doubt my own perceptions and worth. I'd also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. My college roommate, Zoe Patterson, had flown in from California when she heard about the divorce, and she'd stayed for 2 weeks helping me pick up the pieces of my life. My childhood friend, Marcus Webb, ironically sharing a first name with the fictional lover Garrison had created, had introduced me to his social circle in Hartford, where I'd found a community of professionals who appreciated my skills and didn't care about my family drama. Most importantly, I'd learned to find validation from within rather than seeking it from others. For years, I'd tried desperately to win Garrison's approval, to prove I was worthy of being part of his family. Now I understood that his opinion of me said nothing about my value as a person and everything about his own character flaws. My business had actually grown during the months following the divorce. Word had spread through the business community about my situation, and surprisingly, many potential clients saw my personal experience with financial deception as an asset rather than a liability. I'd taken on several high-profile cases involving corporate fraud, and my reputation as a thorough, relentless investigator had attracted clients from across New England. I'd also started dating again, though nothing serious yet. There was a prosecutor named David Kellerman who'd asked me out several times, and a fellow business owner named Ryan Torres who'd made it clear he was interested. but I was in no rush. For the first time in my adult life, I was content being alone, confident in my own strength and independence. As I left the country club that night, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. For months, I'd been planning this moment of revenge, this public exposure of Garrison's crimes. I'd imagined it would feel more satisfying, more triumphant. Instead, it felt like the end of a painful chapter and the beginning of something entirely new. The media coverage of Garrison's arrest was extensive. The story had everything reporters loved: wealth, betrayal, family drama, and a dramatic public confrontation. I gave several interviews in the days following the retirement party, and while some of the attention was uncomfortable, I was glad to have the opportunity to tell my side of the story publicly. The impact on Holbrook and Associates was immediate and severe. Several major clients canceled their contracts, citing concerns about the company's financial practices. The bonding company that insured their construction projects launched their own investigation, and the state contractors licensing board opened proceedings to determine whether the company should be allowed to continue operating. Camden worked tirelessly to save the business, bringing in outside auditors, implementing new financial controls, and personally meeting with every major client to assure them that the company's problems had been limited to his father's actions. Mallory, who as CFO had somehow missed the embezzlement, faced her own legal and professional challenges. Several clients filed lawsuits claiming she'd been negligent in her oversight duties, and the state CPA board launched an investigation into her professional conduct. Sterling, meanwhile, experienced something of a personal renaissance. With the truth about the embezzlement revealed, he was no longer the family scapegoat. He entered rehab again, but this time with genuine family support rather than just anger and disappointment. Camden later told me that Sterling had been clean for 4 months and was actually contributing meaningfully to the company's rebuilding efforts. Garrison's criminal trial began 8 months after his arrest. I testified as the prosecution's star witness, walking the jury through the complex financial scheme he'd created and explaining how he'd used my supposed infidelity as cover for his crimes. The defense tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge, but the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. During his testimony, Garrison showed no remorse for what he'd done to me personally. He admitted to the embezzlement, there was too much evidence to deny it, but maintained that framing me for adultery had been a necessary step to protect his family from scandal. Even facing years in prison, he couldn't acknowledge that destroying an innocent person's life might have been wrong. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Garrison was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to Holbrook and Associates. At 68 years old, he would likely spend the rest of his productive life behind bars. I felt no joy watching him being led away in shackles. By then, my anger had transformed into something more like pity. Here was a man who'd had everything: a successful business, a loving family, respect in his community, and he'd thrown it all away because of greed and prejudice. The civil lawsuits that followed were equally satisfying. I sued Garrison personally for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy. The case was settled out of court 3 months later for an amount that my lawyer described as substantial enough to ensure your financial security for life. I also received a formal written apology, though it came from Garrison's lawyers rather than from him personally. More importantly, several of the business associates who'd shunned me after the divorce reached out to apologize and offer new opportunities. My reputation was not just restored, but enhanced. I became known as the forensic accountant who'd single-handedly exposed one of Connecticut's biggest financial scandals, and my client base expanded beyond anything I'd imagined possible. A year after Garrison's sentencing, I received an unexpected call from Camden. Holbrook and Associates had survived the scandal and was actually thriving under his leadership. He'd implemented new transparency measures, brought in outside board members, and focused on rebuilding trust with clients and employees. I wanted you to know that we've established a scholarship fund. he told me during that phone call. The Evangeline Morrison Scholarship for women pursuing degrees in accounting and financial forensics. We're funding it with some of the money Dad stole, the portion that's been recovered so far. I was touched by the gesture, though I made it clear that I didn't want any public recognition or involvement in the scholarship's administration. It felt right that something positive should come from the destruction Garrison had caused, but I was ready to move forward with my own life. That life had become fuller and richer than I'd ever imagined possible. My therapy with Dr. Winters had helped me process not just the trauma of the divorce, but years of subtle emotional abuse I'd endured while trying to fit into the Holbrook family. I'd learned to recognize my own worth, to trust my instincts, and to surround myself with people who appreciated me for who I truly was. My chosen family had grown to include an eclectic group of friends and colleagues who provided the support and acceptance I'd never found with my in-laws. There was Zoe, who'd become my closest confidant and business advisor. Marcus Webb, who'd introduced me to hiking and helped me discover a love of outdoor adventures I'd never known I had. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a fellow business owner who'd become both a mentor and friend, teaching me about work-life balance and the importance of pursuing passions outside of career success. I'd also reconnected with my biological family in Ohio. My parents had been devastated by the divorce and the allegations against me, but they'd never stopped believing in my innocence. When the truth came out, my mother cried for an hour, telling me how proud she was of my strength and resilience. My father, a man of few words, simply said, "I always knew you were tougher than those fancy people gave you credit for." My brother Jake, who worked as a police detective in Columbus, had offered to come to Connecticut and have a conversation with Garrison when he first heard about the fake evidence. I'd talked him out of it at the time, but I appreciated knowing that someone was ready to fight for me when I couldn't fight for myself. 18 months after the retirement party confrontation, I attended another social event that perfectly illustrated how much my life had changed. The Connecticut Association of Forensic Accountants was hosting their annual gala, and I'd been invited to receive their Excellence in Investigation award for my work on the Holbrook case. The event was held at the same country club where I'd exposed Garrison's crimes, but this time I walked through those doors as the guest of honor rather than an uninvited intruder seeking justice. I wore a stunning emerald green dress that complemented my auburn hair, and I felt confident and radiant in a way I'd never experienced during my marriage. The award presentation was gratifying, but what meant more to me were the conversations I had throughout the evening. Fellow professionals sought me out to discuss cases, to ask for advice, to share their own stories of overcoming professional challenges. I was respected for my expertise, valued for my insights, and accepted without reservation. Near the end of the evening, I was surprised to see Camden approach my table. He looked good, healthier than he had at his father's retirement party, with some of the stress lines around his eyes softened. We hadn't spoken in several months, and I wasn't sure what to expect from the encounter. "Congratulations on the award," he said sincerely. "You deserve all the recognition you're getting." "Thank you," I replied. "How are things at the company?" "Better than I dared hope," he admitted. "We're actually stronger now than we were before Dad's arrest. The new transparency measures have attracted clients who value integrity over old boy network connections." We talked for a few minutes about business, carefully avoiding anything too personal. But as he was preparing to leave, Camden said something that surprised me. "I want you to know that I'm in therapy now," he said quietly. "Dr. Elizabeth Harper, she specializes in helping people recover from family trauma and manipulation. I'm learning things about my relationship with my father that I never understood before." "That's good," I said genuinely. "It's important work." "She helped me understand how he manipulated both of us," Camden continued. "How he used my love for him and my fear of disappointing him to turn me against you. I know it doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was, how completely I failed you as a husband." I studied his face and saw genuine remorse there. a depth of understanding that hadn't been present during our painful conversations immediately after Garrison's arrest. "I'm glad you're doing that work," I said. "Everyone deserves to understand how they've been affected by their family dynamics." Are you happy?" he asked, and I could hear the vulnerability in his voice. I considered the question seriously before answering. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm happier than I've ever been, not because of what happened to your father, but because I learned who I really am when everything else was stripped away." Camden nodded, accepting my answer even though I could see it wasn't what he'd hoped to hear. "I'm glad," he said, and I believed he meant it. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." After he left, I sat at my table for a while, reflecting on the conversation and on how much both of our lives had changed. Camden seemed genuinely committed to understanding and changing the patterns that had allowed his father to manipulate him so completely. I hoped he'd find peace and maybe even love again, though I knew it wouldn't be with me. The evening concluded with a reception where I mingled with colleagues and potential clients, discussing future projects and sharing insights from my recent cases. As I drove home to my beautiful new house in West Hartford, a place I'd chosen and furnished entirely according to my own tastes, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and contentment. My home had become a reflection of who I truly was rather than who I thought I should be. Instead of the formal, stuffy decor that had characterized the house I'd shared with Camden, I'd created warm, welcoming spaces filled with books, art from local artists, and comfortable furniture perfect for entertaining the friends who'd become my chosen family. The guest room was frequently occupied by Zoe during her business trips to the East Coast or by my parents when they came to visit. The home office was my sanctuary, equipped with the latest technology and organized exactly how I liked it. The kitchen had become a place where I experimented with cooking, discovering a passion for international cuisine that I'd never had time to explore during my marriage. 2 years after Garrison's sentencing, I received news that surprised me. Sterling Hallbrook had been accepted to a graduate program in addiction counseling and had asked if he could meet with me before starting his studies. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Hartford, and I was struck by how different he looked. The haunted, desperate expression I remembered from family gatherings had been replaced by something calmer and more focused. "I wanted to thank you," he said after we'd ordered our drinks. "What you did at Dad's retirement party, exposing what he'd really been doing, it saved my life." "How so?" I asked. "I was planning to kill myself," Sterling said matter-of-factly. "I'd been the family scapegoat for so long, blamed for every financial problem, every disappointment. I thought I was worthless, that everyone would be better off without me. But when you proved that Dad had been stealing all along, that it wasn't my fault the company was having problems, it changed everything." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I'd known that exposing Garrison's crimes would have consequences for the entire family, but I'd never considered that it might literally save someone's life. "I'm glad you're still here," I said quietly. "And I'm proud of you for getting clean and pursuing a career where you can help other people." "Dad destroyed a lot of lives with his lies and manipulation," Sterling continued. "Yours, obviously, but also mine and Camden's and even Mallory's. I want to spend the rest of my life helping people recover from that kind of trauma." We talked for another hour about his recovery, his career plans, and his slowly rebuilding relationship with Camden. When we parted ways, Sterling hugged me and said, "You gave me back my life. I'll never forget that." As I drove home from that meeting, I realized that my quest for justice had accomplished something I'd never intended. It had freed an entire family from years of lies and manipulation. Garrison's reign of emotional terror was over, and his children were finally able to begin healing from the damage he'd inflicted. The 3rd anniversary of my divorce passed quietly. Instead of marking it as a day of loss, I'd turned it into a celebration of independence and growth. I took the day off work and spent it hiking with Marcus and Dr. Reeves in the Connecticut River Valley, enjoying the spring wildflowers and the sense of freedom that came from being exactly where I wanted to be with people who truly valued my company. That evening, I hosted a dinner party for my chosen family, Zoe, who was visiting from California. Marcus and his partner David, Dr. Reeves and her husband Tom, my neighbors Jennifer and Michael, who'd become close friends, and Dr. Winters, who'd become not just my therapist, but a trusted friend as our professional relationship had evolved into genuine mutual respect and affection. We sat around my dining room table, sharing stories, laughing, and enjoying the meal I'd prepared with help from Jennifer, who was an excellent cook. The conversation ranged from lighthearted gossip to serious discussions about our work and our dreams for the future. At one point, Dr. Reeves raised her wine glass and proposed a toast. "To Evangeline," she said, "who showed us all what it means to fight for the truth and never give up on yourself." "To chosen family," I replied, raising my own glass, "and to the understanding that love isn't about blood or obligation, but about acceptance, support, and genuine care for each other's well-being." As we clinked glasses around the table, I felt a warmth and contentment that I'd never experienced during all those years of trying to fit into the Holbrook family. This was what belonging felt like, not the desperate attempt to earn approval from people who would never accept me, but the comfortable certainty that I was valued and loved for exactly who I was. Later that evening, after my guests had gone home and I was cleaning up the kitchen, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The betrayal and devastation I'd experienced had nearly destroyed me, but they'd also stripped away everything that wasn't essential, everything that wasn't truly me. In losing Camden and the life I'd built around trying to please his family, I'd found myself. In being forced to rebuild from nothing, I'd created something infinitely better than what I'd had before. In fighting for the truth and justice, I'd discovered strength I never knew I possessed. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I worried it might be from Garrison. He was allowed limited communication from prison, and I wouldn't put it past him to try one last manipulation. But when I opened the message, it was from Camden. "Saw the article about your promotion to managing partner at Hartford Forensic Associates. Congratulations, you deserve every success. I hope you know that what happened between us was the biggest mistake of my life, and I'll spend the rest of my days regretting that I wasn't strong enough to trust you over my father's lies. I wish you all the happiness in the world." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was sadness for what we'd lost, gratitude for his acknowledgement of the truth, and a kind of closure that I hadn't realized I still needed. I typed back a simple response, "Thank you, I hope you found peace too." Then I deleted his number from my phone, not out of anger or bitterness, but because I was ready to close that chapter of my life completely. The woman who had desperately wanted Camden's love and Garrison's approval no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, and infinitely more content with the life she'd built entirely on her own terms. 4 years after the retirement party confrontation, I received an invitation that perfectly symbolized how completely my life had transformed. The Connecticut Women in Business Association was honoring me as their Entrepreneur of the Year, recognizing not just my professional success, but my role in exposing financial fraud and helping other women who'd faced similar challenges. Hartford Forensic Associates, the firm I'd started from nothing after my divorce, now employed 12 people and had offices in 3 states. We specialized in cases involving family fraud, corporate embezzlement, and financial abuse, areas where my personal experience had given me unique insights and credibility. The awards ceremony was held at the Hartford Convention Center, with over 500 attendees, including many of the most influential women in Connecticut. As I stood at the podium accepting the award, I looked out at the audience and saw faces that represented the life I'd built, colleagues who respected my expertise, friends who valued my friendship, and mentees who looked to me for guidance and inspiration. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of trusting yourself even when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong. I spoke about the power of chosen family and the strength that comes from surrounding yourself with people who support your growth rather than trying to diminish your light. And I emphasized that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the foundation for the most authentic and fulfilling life imaginable. 5 years ago, I concluded, I thought my life was over. I'd lost my marriage, my reputation, and my place in the community I'd called home. But what I discovered is that when you're forced to rebuild from nothing, you have the opportunity to create exactly the life you want rather than the life others expect from you. The woman who was destroyed by lies and manipulation no longer exists. In her place is someone who knows her own worth, trusts her own judgment, and surrounds herself with people who celebrate her success rather than trying to undermine it. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying. But what meant more to me were the conversations I had afterward with women who shared their own stories of overcoming betrayal, finding their strength, and building lives of authentic happiness and success. As I drove home that night, past the country club where I'd once confronted Garrison Holbrook, I thought about the woman I'd been then, desperate for justice, burning with anger, focused entirely on revenge. That confrontation had been necessary, but it had only been the beginning of my real journey. The true victory hadn't been exposing Garrison's crimes or watching him led away in handcuffs. It had been discovering who I really was when all the external validation was stripped away. It had been learning to find worth and meaning from within rather than seeking approval from others. It had been building relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and manipulation. Most importantly, it had been understanding that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about the people who choose to love and support you, who celebrate your successes and help you through your failures, who see your true self and value it completely. As I pulled into the driveway of my beautiful home, I saw lights on in the windows and knew that Zoe was inside waiting for me. She'd flown in from California to attend the awards ceremony and would be staying for a long weekend. Tomorrow, we'd meet Marcus and Dr. Reeves for brunch, and in the evening, we'd have a small celebration with my chosen family. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at my house and feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for the life I'd built. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I married Camden Holbrook all those years ago, but it was infinitely better. It was a life built on truth rather than lies, on acceptance rather than judgment, on love that was freely given rather than grudgingly earned. Garrison Holbrook had thought he was destroying me when he orchestrated my divorce and tried to ruin my reputation. Instead, he'd freed me to become the person I was always meant to be. And for that, despite everything he'd put me through, I was almost grateful. The final lesson I'd learned from my experience was perhaps the most important one. Sometimes the people who try to break you are actually giving you exactly what you need to become unbreakable. The betrayal that nearly destroyed me had ultimately been the catalyst for the most authentic, fulfilling, and genuinely happy life I could have ever imagined. As I walked up the path to my front door, I smiled, knowing that inside waited people who loved me not despite my flaws but because of them, who valued my strength and supported my dreams, who had chosen to be my family just as I had chosen them. This was what victory really looked like, not the public humiliation of an enemy, but the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived and authentically earned. The lights in my house were warm and welcoming, and I could hear laughter from inside. My chosen family was waiting for me, ready to celebrate not just tonight's award, but the incredible journey that had brought us all together. I opened the door and stepped into the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal, a life that was entirely, authentically, and joyfully mine.